Did pots contribute to Mackenzie Shirilla crashing a car that killed Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan? We're going through the text messages with Shirilla to see if we can find any evidence of this condition and what the courts had to say about this supposed diagnosis. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. You know, as I was recording this episode, I looked at the data. I was like, oh my gosh, Father's Day is around the corner. Where did the time go? Well, I'll tell you what. If you're looking for what is the perfect gift out there for all the dads, meet the Chef IQ Sense Smart Meat Thermometer. This is the secret to stress-free restaurant-level cooking. Whether you're a seasoned grill master, maybe you're just trying to throw some steaks on for this summer, the Smart Thermometer is a game changer because there's no more overcooking. There's no more, I think this might be done. No. Chef IQ tells you exactly when your meat is ready every step of the way. Just insert the wireless probe, you select your preferences, you hang out, you relax, you wait for the app alerts without even having to hover over the grill. It also works with ovens and smokers and stovetops and air fryers, and for every protein, prime rib, wings, salmon. Seriously, this Father's Day, it's time to raise the stakes. No pun intended, and cook with confidence. Use code SIDEBAR for 40% off site-wide at chefiq.com. POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It is a medical condition that has come up quite a lot in the Mackenzie Shirilla case, the case that has captured the national attention, the case that has blown up on social media, the case that everybody has been talking about, the case that we have been focusing a lot here on Sidebar, but I want to explore POTS a little bit more. That is something we haven't taken the time to do. And I want to explore it because it was the defense that she put forward. So I want to explore it in the text messages between Shirilla. I want to explore how it was put forward in the trial because at the end of the day, the convicted murderer has claimed that it was this condition that contributed to the crash when she drove a car 100 miles per hour into a wall, killing her two passengers, her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend, Davion Flanagan. This is back on July 31st, 2022. Shirilla was found guilty by a judge in a bench trial of 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools.
She had a mission, and she executed it with precision. The mission was death. Mackenzie alone decided to push the pedal to the floor and demand the ultimate speed of that vehicle to 90 to 100 miles per hour. She alone decided what was to be. Mackenzie decided death was the ultimate goal that day, and she alone made that decision for Dominic and Davion, and she continuously acted in a manner to achieve the purpose.
Yeah, the evidence showed she held that accelerator down, that she never tried to brake. Shirilla, though, has insisted ever since then she doesn't remember what happened. She didn't remember the crash. She didn't remember what led up to it. She and her family have suggested that this is POTS, this medical condition that can cause dizziness and fainting, that contributed to what happened, that she may have blacked out. Now, at trial, and we're going to talk about this more, there was no official medical diagnosis that was presented by her team. No medical expert took the stand. There was also no evidence of the car malfunctioning. There was no presentation of a severe intoxication. So the evidence that was presented was essentially, or at least by the prosecution, that she did this purposely. And after her 2023 trial where she was convicted, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole starting in 2037. And now she's in the news a lot because of the Netflix documentary, The Crash, where she said she's not a monster, there was no intent behind this crash, that she loved Dom. One of the things she said in the documentary was, quote, "The most logical speculation seems to be a medical emergency." But when she was asked, okay, so how do you maintain control over the car if you're suffering this medical emergency, right? There's no braking. She responds, "I'm unsure because I have no recollection of that morning, but I know nothing about it was intentional because that's not in my character." I want to explore that a little bit. I want to explore, is there anything there? Now, in a little bit, I'm going to bring on Dr. Daniel Bober, a forensic psychiatrist, to analyze this. My understanding is he has actually treated patients with POTS. So when you hear what Shirilla has claimed, does it match up? Okay? But first, I want to do something different. I want to go through the text messages from Shirilla to Shirilla where it's interesting. We were trying to find messages that are about POTS I mean, to be clear, we went through all these messages. We couldn't find anything specifically about POTS per se, but there are mentions of medical issues here. And is she describing POTS? And we're going to get to this later, but you listen to the dates of these exchanges in relation to the July 31st, 2022 crash. And for example, Mackenzie's mother, Natalie, would testify. We're going to talk more about this as well, but she would testify that Mackenzie was diagnosed with POTS in 2017. And yet, again, as far as we could see, there don't seem to be messages specifically describing this, but the symptoms that Mackenzie does seem to describe is this POTS. So let me give you an example of what I mean. From Shirilla, July 2nd, 2022, so this is just weeks before the crash, quote, "The one I just had was probably the worst blackout-like pain level I've had. I'm scared it's just going to get worse." Now, Dom writes to Shirilla on July 2nd, 2022, "But you can take vitamins that will help blood flow." Also another message from Dom, "What I'm saying is your blood vessel aren't working right to get enough blood to your brain. That's why you black out." Also from Dom, "Main causes of blackouts is blood flow. Let's try getting you vitamins that support that." Shirilla responds at one point, "So are you saying I'm vitamin deficient or something I don't even know?" Dom replies, "No." Now here's the thing. These blackout conversations were actually happening well before the crash. I'm talking years before. Look at this from February 8th, 2020. Shirilla writes, "I had a really bad blackout today, FR." Dom writes, "How? What happened?" Shirilla, "IDEK," meaning I don't even know, "I straight passed out." And there's a lot of conversations about tests, which is interesting considering her mom would claim that she was diagnosed in 2017. But you go to 2021, for example, June 25th, 2021, Dom writes, "When did you start feeling like S? Is it because you haven't ate?" Shirilla responds, "Pretty much my back just started burning like super bad." April 29th, 2021, Shirilla writes, "Do you know how many times I've taken a test for them to tell me it's nothing?" February 9th, 2021, "It's hard to do anything when your stomach is in constant pain." February 18th, 2021, Shirilla again writes, "I've taken every test in the book. No one cares about my pain. I don't even think anyone believes it." February 8th, 2021, "If you told me you were in pain no matter what the bleep it was, I would be with you right by your side, ready to lay with you and do whatever you need. I guess you can't match that though." Again, this is Shirilla writing. March 18th, 2021, Shirilla writes, "Sorry, babe, I had you just fall asleep. I literally couldn't even walk around. My back was in so much pain." February 18th, 2021, Shirilla writes, "Everyone acts like I just want to curl up in a ball with a heating pad all day." Dom writes, "Are there better doctors that you can see?" Shirilla responds, "No doctors is going to be able to help." June 25th, 2021, Shirilla writes, "Then it got really bad and literally nothing was making the pain go away, and then all of a sudden I just threw up." March 3rd, 2022, Shirilla writes, "They trying to put me on anxiety meds, like what the bleep." March 3rd, 2022, "The doctor is telling me weed is bad for me." Now, I'm going to talk more about these text messages, and I want to get Dr. Bober's perspective on this to analyze what he makes of it and whether or not she is describing the conditions of POTS. But I want to go to the court for a second. I want to go to the appellate court, how they looked at what happened at the trial level, at the trial, regarding POTS, and whether Mackenzie Shirilla's convictions should be overturned. Remember, she appealed them. So this is from the appellate court, and they write in their opinion, quote, "Shirilla contends that the weight of the evidence establishes that Shirilla and Russo's relationship was in a good place at the time of the fatal crash. Burlinghouse and Raja saw them shortly before the crash and did not report anything out of the ordinary. Others who knew Shirilla and Russo, Grolow, Shipley, Shirilla's mother, also testified that the two seemed to be in love. Shirilla points out that her POTS condition may have led to a medical issue that caused the accident, or she may have had some other medical emergency like a heart attack or seizure. Shirilla posited that the crash could have been caused by distracted driving or simple recklessness, contrary to the testimony of Detective Hazow that Shirilla often drove distracted or recklessly according to her social media. She argues that in light of all these possible other explanations, the manifest weight of the evidence weighs against the verdicts." Esther Sang testified that she is employed as a trauma surgeon at Metro Health Medical Center. The parties stipulated that Dr. Sang is an expert in the field of trauma medicine. Shirilla was examined on July 31st, 2022 after the crash. According to medical records, Shirilla reported pain, quote, everywhere. An exam determined that her airway was intact, her breathing and circulation were normal, and her pupils were reacting normally. She was alert and oriented. Shirilla's mother informed medical personnel that Shirilla had a history of POTS, which can cause a patient to have an unusually elevated heart rate. Medical personnel did not note any cardiovascular, neurological, joint, or muscle symptoms. No symptoms related to sleep disturbances, anxiety, memory loss, disorientation, inattention, or depression were noted. An electrocardiogram, which was performed, revealed that the electrical function of Shirilla's heart was normal. On cross-examination, presumably by the defense, Dr. Sang admitted that a blood oxygen level of 82 would be abnormally low for most people. Dr. Sang further admitted that a patient with POTS may experience dizziness or a headache. Medical personnel evaluated Shirilla approximately 2 hours after the reported time of the crash. A person who has suffered a seizure or a mini stroke could possibly have recovered within 2 hours. So, namely meaning, hey, there's a reason that when she was evaluated, it didn't look like she had POTS or didn't suffer from POTS, but maybe there's an explanation for that. Court goes on to say, with respect to Shirilla's physical health, Natalie, again, this is Shirilla's mother who testified, has seen Shirilla suffer symptoms from POTS at least twice. Natalie described her understanding that the condition can cause low blood pressure and an increased heart rate and can cause someone to lose consciousness. On cross-examination, Natalie testified that Shirilla was diagnosed with POTS in 2017 at the Cleveland Clinic. Natalie could not remember the name of the doctor who made the diagnosis. Natalie took Shirilla to the doctor after Shirilla fell to the kitchen floor on one occasion. The doctors made the diagnosis and gave Shirilla salt tabs to treat the condition. Shirilla would take the tablets or eat a salty food, quote, as needed. Since the diagnosis, there have been a couple occasions where Shirilla would feel herself feeling low in salt or woozy and would sit down and eat some crackers or another salty food. Natalie admitted that she helped Shirilla apply for a driver's license twice since the POTS diagnosis was made, and neither time disclosed the condition. Natalie testified that Shirilla had experienced a POTS episode a week or two before the crash and reported that it was really bad and it hadn't been that bad in a long time, and she was scared it was going to get worse. Natalie admitted that she did not take Shirilla to a doctor or limit Shirilla's driving privileges. While Dr. Sang testified that it is possible that Shirilla could have suffered a medical emergency like a seizure or mini stroke while still appearing normal in the medical examination, other evidence makes this potential explanation seem unreasonable. For example, Shirilla denied having adverse medical conditions when applying for a driver's license both before and after the crash. Moreover, someone manually moved the gear shift back into drive after it was moved to neutral in the seconds before the crash. There was no evidence presented that any medical condition could have caused Shirilla to simultaneously lose the ability to take her foot off the accelerator or hit the brakes while also intentionally manipulating the gear shift. A distracted driving incident is also not consistent with the forensic evidence, which shows that Shirilla never took her foot off the accelerator even as the car hit a curb, when airborne, landed, and continued toward a brick wall. Shirilla argued her case to the trial court, and the court was permitted to reject any portion of the state's evidence or witness testimony that was inconsistent or otherwise unbelievable. We cannot say that this is the exceptional case in which the evidence weighs heavily against the court's verdicts. Okay, like I said, now I want to bring on Dr. Daniel Bober, forensic psychiatrist, to talk about this. Thank you so much for taking the time, sir. Let's start here. What exactly is POTS? What are the symptoms of POTS?
So POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And this is essentially a syndrome where when you stand up, your heart rate increases, but your blood pressure does not change. And the symptoms of POTS can be lightheadedness, tremulousness, fatigue, and actually passing out or fainting is somewhat uncommon. So normally you don't see that.
So the idea of blacking out, fainting, not remembering what happened, you're telling me uncommon in your experience if someone has POTS or because it's because of POTS?
So very often POTS will co-occur with something called vasovagal syncope, where syncope, which is a transient loss of consciousness, does occur and they do pass out. What's interesting about this case is that in true POTS, passing out is not a common thing to occur. And it's even less common in someone who is recumbent or sitting down as they would be when they're driving a car. Normally, you expect to see POTS symptoms in someone who is standing up.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was the part that for the past few weeks I've been trying to understand. Like, I understand that when I've been researching POTS, it's a lot about if you're standing up or in a position, you're walking, but sitting down in a car. Now, let's play devil's advocate for a second because I was always wondering, I was like, how can it be effective? If you're sitting there, you're not. If someone's in a heated argument or they're angry and they're sitting and driving, could there be an episode of severe POTS where there is a complication and someone does get dizzy or someone does get lightheaded or someone does black out, driving in some sort of argument, just playing devil's advocate?
It's possible, but it's not probable. Okay. You would have to have that occur at precisely the right time or the right moment. Okay. And you wouldn't have purposeful movement. You couldn't steer a car. You couldn't accelerate or decelerate. You couldn't, turn on an angle. So if you're truly passed out and you've lost consciousness, you wouldn't be able to engage in these purposeful motor activities that she supposedly did.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible? Is it possible someone can have a POTS episode and they really don't have a memory? They don't have a memory of what happened?
If someone had a syncopal episode and they blacked out, it is possible during a blackout to lose your memory.
How do you treat people with POTS, by the way?
So there's different medications that you use. For example, one of them is called midodrine to try to treat it symptomatically. But the pathophysiology of POTS is very complicated. It involves the immune system, the cardiac system, the nervous system. It's a very difficult thing to treat. And as a psychiatrist, what I can tell you is that POTS frequently is comorbid with other conditions like depression, like anxiety, like somatization syndrome. And what somatization is essentially it's a physical expression of psychological distress. So people with POTS frequently do have psychiatric symptoms. And interestingly enough, females are affected 5 times the rate as males are.
And that's interesting when you think about Mackenzie Shirilla, right? There have been a conversation of, was she trying to kill herself during this episode? Was she, anxious? Was she depressed? I mentioned earlier what her mother had testified to or spoke about, that she took Shirilla to the doctor, that she had been diagnosed by the Cleveland Clinic in 2017 as having POTS, that the doctors gave her salt tabs to treat the condition and to eat salty food as needed. Does that make sense to you?
Well, certainly that would raise your blood volume, and that might be one of the things that would protect you against having these POTS symptoms. But I think, unfortunately for her, she wasn't really a very sympathetic figure based on some of her behavior after the crime. And I think in some ways she has become emblematic of the older generation looking at the younger generation who has, essentially lived their lives through social media. And I think they interpreted a lot of her behavior as having a lack of remorse. So I do think there's a generational divide here in how older people view it and how people in the Gen Z generation view it.
There is no doubt that the evidence against her was also not just about the accelerator and the gear shift and the way that the car was positioned and how it hit the wall. It was also evidence about, yes, how she behaved afterwards, showing this lack of remorse. So that's what the prosecutor said. And also there was evidence that she was staking out that road beforehand, right? It was the idea of planning it. So there was a lot here. Going back to the messages, and I went through that earlier, where she writes about having stomach pain and she writes about having back pain, according to her, very, very severe. Is that consistent with somebody who has POTS?
That is the somatization we talked about. People who have physical symptoms that are often an indicator of psychological distress. That could be somatization.
So in other words, if I'm understanding correctly, it's not outside the realm of possibility that she might have had POTS coupled with other conditions, but it would be unlikely, very improbable, that that was the contributory factor for the crash at that moment in time. Just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Yes, that's correct. Now, obviously, the appeal now is not based on guilt or innocence. It's based on things that are procedural. Was there ineffective assistance of counsel? If POTS was in fact at play here, didn't her defense counsel have an obligation to put on a medical expert, to bring up records, maybe to speak with her treating physician who was treating her for the POTS? These are all things that I think the parents would argue should have been done.
Do you think it was interesting they didn't call a medical expert?
I do, and I think it makes me think that at this point, sort of throw anything against the wall and see what sticks. It doesn't mean necessarily that POTS was not a factor here, but I do think it's curious that that was never presented as a defense strategy from the beginning.
And again, unless someone can write me, say, you missed this, Jesse, I went through messages, and I didn't see text messages from Shirilla to Shirilla. Maybe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, let me know, where over the years she specifically addresses POTS. And if I'm right about that, is that strange? Because again, you have this kind of testimony about her being diagnosed with it, but at the same time, you know, in her conversations about the pain she's experiencing, doesn't mention it. Is that strange to you? Or maybe is it possible she didn't know she had it?
It's strange to me, and also these are things I would want to know. How often did she see this doctor that was treating her POTS? What was the frequency of her visits? What did those records say about how active her symptoms were, or how frequently they occurred, or to what degree they impaired her life functioning? These are all important questions, but let's not forget here that this defendant is 17 years old, and it was the Supreme Court in Roper v. Simmons that recognized the relative immaturity and reduced culpability of people in this age group. And it doesn't mean she wasn't responsible, and it doesn't mean she shouldn't be punished. But there are, as what the Supreme Court said, evolving standards of decency, and the recognition of the fact that people in this age group sometimes act without thinking, sometimes act without weighing the future consequences of their actions. And so I think we also have to look at it through that lens, as much as the behavior after the crime was off-putting to people.
And just real quick before I let you go, I don't know if you saw what she had to say in the documentary or how she behaved during the trial. I know you haven't had an opportunity to interview her yourself, but some things stand out to you about her behavior, the way she acts. What do you take away from it?
Well, again, right, it's all how you tell the story. If you and I looked at it, we might find that behavior is callous, lacking remorse, cold, that she was unaffected by her actions. But in that generation, who really does live their life on social media and spends an average of 3 to 4 hours a day doing it, that might be just business as usual. So it really depends on how you interpret it. But I do think that she didn't do herself any favors by behaving that way, given the implications of what she did.
Dr. Daniel Bober, thanks for coming on, giving your thoughts as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.